Hello, I'm Robert, voluntary fact checker and helping you feel scared of many things. And this is to people worried about all these rather silly things that Russia is doing, that achieve nothing for Russia. And I'll get Radkin what he said about it. I'll just pop that up. Right, so here's what Radkin's, Admiral Radkin, and he's the former chief of police of the chief of the military for the United Kingdom, and he was very close with Ukraine. He had top access to top secret intelligence about everything, and also about Russia, obviously, through their intelligence. And he says that Russia is doing these things, grey areas, sub-threshold attacks, because it's not willing and not able to do a direct attack. So this is it. He's not going to do more than this. This is all that he can do. And that's Admiral Radkin's view and personal opinion on it, as a top expert on someone who's been leading the UK military. And so that's what I'm trying to help you to understand here. And I'm going to go through the things bit by bit just to explain for each one why he's doing this, because he can't do anything more. He's not preparation for anything. So first of all, the fighter jet incursions. So fighter jet incursions, what happened is that they just flew just inside the Estonian airspace for 15 minutes. Now, Russia knows perfectly well that Estonia is one of the most patrolled parts of NATO territory. It's got an actual air patrol that is based in Lithuania, and they're constantly flying into the sky around Estonia and the Baltic states. And as soon as they went into the Estonian airspace, of course, they have got a radio saying to them over the radio, they're saying, look, you're in Estonia's airspace, get out. And they didn't respond. So the next step after that, of course, Russia knows perfectly well what NATO's pattern of things that it does. So they've written out rules that all of NATO does. So the next step after this is that the fighter jets flew up, and they flew right next to the Russian fighter jets, the 3 Russian fighter jets, and they sent some NATO fighter jets up with them. And because they weren't responding on radio, they see if I can get this. They kind of flipped their wings like that. They slowly flipped their wings left and right, because it was daytime. If it was night, they'd flash their lights. And then the Russian fighter jets, they flipped their wings back and forth like that, in order to signal back, yes, we know you're there. And then the NATO fighter jets would have been veering, going from below and around in front of them to the right, because they wanted them to turn right. And the Russian fighter jets just ignored that instruction and continued wiggling their wings for 15 minutes, saying, yes, we know you're there, we're not going to do anything. So the next step after that, if they're being ignored, is to fire warning shots. But they will only fire the warning shots if they're actually doing something that could seriously harm, seriously endanger a NATO country. But they were just flying over the sea, just a little bit closer to the coastline than the actual border of Estonia. So there's no actual risk from any of this. So think about that. In what universe is that preparing for a conflict? In what universe is that an actual conflict? What about that sounds like conflict to you at all? Nothing. It's not conflict. It's just a silly kind of dance that they do, that Russia does. And if all this thing about shooting down fighter jets, NATO is not going to change its rules of engagement. If Russia wants to keep on doing that, then they will just keep on wiggling their wings back and forth. They're not going to shoot them down just because they're flying parallel and just inside the airspace. So that's what the fighter jet incursions are about. And NATO is just saying, look, if you do anything like fly towards one of our cities, then we'll shoot you down. And Russia is saying, well, we're not going to do that. And that basically is a standoff there. And it's just one of these irritating things that Russia can do. And they do these incursions many times a year anyway, in one place or another. And they just did a rather longer one. So that's not in any, there's no conflict involved there. It doesn't involve attack. So now, and it's not preparing for anything. And just to make very, very clear that Russia is not, that those fighter jets were extremely vulnerable. The NATO fighter jets were right close to them. They could have easily shot them out of the sky with extreme ease. And they could have been shot out with the air defences too. So this is not the way that in a modern war that Russia would attack a country. So it's nothing to do with war at all. It's just a silly thing that Russia does. And everybody knows the rules, and there's no risk from it either. So now let's look at the flashing drones and see how that also is not preparation for war. It's actually not doing anything sensible for Russia. It just is what it is, and that's all it is. So the bright flashing drones, then that is not Russia saying, look how powerful we are, we can fly drones over an airport. If you go and look at the cost of it, then to replicate that would cost about less than $2 million to buy the 4 drones. So they were, if you can buy them off, they're not military equipment, or at least you can buy non-military equipment that has this capability, but it's quite expensive. It's about $250,000 or so to buy one of these drones. They flew 4 of them from different directions. So I think you would have to hire maybe a couple of ships, but they just flew around from one ship. Anyway, whatever the reason, if you work it all out, it's going to cost you less than $2 million. You'll have some change to spare. So when they said state actor, they were just saying that only a state would waste $2 million on something like this. There are plenty of multimillionaires who could pay for it, but obviously nobody would. And it doesn't involve advanced technology. It's just off-the-shelf technology that anyone can buy if they've got enough money. And it's criminal. And so what is the effect of all this? Well, the police were involved in the Coast Guard, and they didn't know which ship it came from, so they can't actually do anything about it quite yet. But what they are going to do is, what they're doing now is they've got patrols over the Baltic Sea, and these patrols will help ensure that if this happens again and one of these drones flies off a ship and then to fly for hours around an airport, that the police and the Coast Guard will they'd be able to shoot down the drone if they thought it was going before it got near an airport. They'd soon be able to do that. But the main thing is that they would see which ship it came from, and then once they know, oh, it's this ship that it came from, then under international law they can then board that ship, and they can charge them, and they can order them to come into court and face the legal system in Denmark. So if Russia tries to do this again, then the people involved will have a very high risk of being detected and then being taken to the criminal courts in Denmark. So this has not got a very long shelf life, as it were. And so again, how is this any kind of preparation for anything? Because if it was a preparation for something, then what is the point in alerting the Danish Coast Guard and police, and then they've got NATO assets in as well to help with the patrols, but they're in assistance role there. It's not a military operation, and they're just keeping an eye on the Baltic Sea to make sure this doesn't happen again. So this can't be preparation for using drones to do something nefarious, because if you were doing that, you wouldn't go buzzing the airport and ensure that Denmark is on high alert for any attempt to send drones in that area. So again, this is just what it is. There's nothing more. It's not a preparation for anything else. It's just Russia doing what it can do, the maximum it can do, and it's not going to go any further. And then if you look at the Poland drones as well, and all of these have the same thing, that, well, apart from the fighter jets, I'm not sure what that achieves for NATO, but the other things all strengthening NATO. So if you look at the Poland drones, that's very similar again. So the Poland drones, then what happened, the drones that flew into Poland, is that what I mean, then Russia sent these decoy drones. It had an extra fuel tank so they could fly deep within Poland, and they had no explosives on them because they had to be modified to replace the explosives with fuel tanks. And so the NATO airspace was actually a kind of safe haven for Ukraine, for Russia. It has been through most of the war, that when the drones are trying to attack Ukraine, they can actually, if they feel they're being chased by the Ukrainians, as it were, they can fly off into NATO territory, and there they can't be shot at by Ukraine, which hasn't got permission to shoot them down over Poland or Romania, and Poland and Romania won't shoot them down either, so they're completely safe. And then when they come back into Ukraine, then Ukraine has got very little time to respond to them. So Russia's been using this area of Poland and Romania as a kind of safe haven throughout the war in this rather strange way, because of these dynamics. And so what's the effect of sending these Gerber drones deep into Poland? And by sending deep into Poland, they forced Poland to shoot them down, even though they're just decoys, but they can't tell that they're decoys from the radar signature. And this has led to NATO strengthening its eastern flank. With Russia, to go all the way the entire border eventually, but especially focusing on drones that might be coming out of the Ukraine war and so on. And they're now set so that they will just, if necessary, shoot down any drones that are going towards anywhere that could be a risk to civilians. So this has eliminated that safe haven, and it's made NATO much stronger in the drone in the field of shooting down drones, because they're getting technology from Ukraine to shoot down the drones for much lower cost. So they can shoot down $10,000 drones with a similar cost interceptors instead of these very expensive missiles that they had to do for this first time. So again, how is that preparation for a war? It doesn't make sense, does it? How is that? It's not conflict at present. It was just they were pointless drones. They didn't do anything. They didn't have any explosives. They weren't even very good at spy drones. They're absolutely pointless. All they did is to just create a fuss in the media, and to get NATO to become stronger along its flank with Russia. And most of what Russia does makes NATO stronger. It's almost as if Putin's objective in the war was, let's make NATO as strong as we possibly can. He pretty much forced Finland and Sweden to join NATO, and he's forced NATO through all his endless threats, and just by continuing to fight in Ukraine, then he pretty much forced NATO to increase its defense spending so it has become far, far stronger than it was before the war. It's forced NATO to develop this 300,000 strong Allied response force, and NATO already was vastly superior to Russia, and as Admiral Radican says, they have vast overmatch in the sea and in the air. And as a result of all this strengthening of NATO that's happened during the Ukraine war, they also are able to get the soldiers on the ground there very quickly as well. So they would be immediately able to block any attempt by Russia to try to invade or attack NATO. So Putin is very much like a chess player who can't see one move ahead. He does something, and the immediate obvious response to that strengthens NATO. And he's been doing that all the way through. And it's been very similar when the way he lost Syria. So he decided to keep advancing in Donbass, achieving nothing, losing thousands of soldiers, probably 30,000, 40,000 soldiers a month. And he did that while the rebels in open trucks were deposing the Assad regime, which of course is wonderful for Syria, but from Putin's point of view that's a big setback, or it should be if he was from a military point of view. He lost the Tartus port, and so, I mean, just an example that shows he lost access to the Middle East and to the Mediterranean. Very difficult for him now to get there, especially with the Bosphorus Strait closed for the Black Sea. And he lost that all for what? For the to advance a little bit further in eastern Donbass, which he could easily have just paused for a month or two and then said, well, let's just have a bit of a break there. But he never does. He just continually advances, very, very slowly, losing large numbers of soldiers, and with very little point to it. So I think perhaps he just wants news stories in the West. Perhaps he wants to be in the news in the West. Perhaps he's keen on, he looks at perhaps it's something to do with internal politics in Russia. It's something to do with maybe with his own personal wealth and health. Maybe some way involved. Whatever the reasons are, they're not military, and he has definitely not got some long-term plan to attack NATO, because he wouldn't act in these ways that strengthen NATO if his aim was to attack NATO. Can you see that? Doesn't make much sense, does it? To try every which way you possibly can to make NATO as strong as possible because you want to attack it. That makes no sense whatsoever. So it's clear that Putin just doesn't care about that. He doesn't mind how strong NATO gets. Otherwise he would behave in a different way. And all these things are not, as Radkin said very clearly. So when you hear other people say that Putin's actually even fighting a world war, which makes no sense whatsoever, or that he's preparing to attack NATO, and with these things, then ask yourself in your mind. You probably can't ask them if they've done a video or something, but ask yourself in your mind, have they explained? Have they made a connection? Have they explained how sending flashing drones over a Danish airport would be a natural thing to do, and actually even make any sense whatsoever as a way to start to prepare for conflict with NATO? If so, in what way, and how, and what does it achieve? And how does it make it possible for Russia to attack NATO? In what way? Or the Poland drones, in what way is that prepared for Russia to attack NATO? Or the fighter jet incursions and the wiggling and all that ritual. How does any of this in any way, in any universe, prepare for Russia to attack NATO in any way whatsoever, even minor conflict? And the answer is, it doesn't at all. So I hope this helps you to be much less scared, and to please listen to people like Admiral Radkin, and don't listen to these other people who I'm not going to name, who make these absurd claims, and they just... So when I listen and decide who I'm going to listen to, it's not just whether they've got qualifications, or whether they've got some rank in the military or whatever. Although Radkin has the very highest qualifications you could possibly have, and very high rank. But it's also, does what they say actually make sense? Is it rational? Is it reasonable? Are they explaining themselves? Because if they've got something sensible to say, they should be able to say it in a way that makes sense. And if the things they say just don't fit together, like claiming that flashing drones over a Danish airport and all this stuff is something, if it doesn't actually make sense, and then the other one like Radkin, things he says do make sense, then you listen to the ones that make sense. And then especially so if the one that makes sense also is very, very high rank, very high reputation, extremely knowledgeable. And that's the situation here. So we're lucky to have an extremely knowledgeable, very high rank expert military leader who's just retired, who is telling us very, very clearly that Russia is not going to attack NATO. So he is the one we should listen to. And then use these ideas to kind of as a test of all the others, and use the things that he says, and if the things that they say, they don't raise the points that he did, like the vast overmatch of NATO in the air and sea, they don't mention that. If they don't mention the points about how these are just things that don't actually, he's doing them, his explanation that he's doing them because he can't do more. And if they don't mention that as a possible explanation, they don't even think about that. So anyway, so I hope that this helps you to be much less scared about all this and just have a little bit more careful in how think a bit more critically about people, and then if you get someone who says these things like that, and you say, well, that's not a very reliable chap, whatever his reason, and you get some people with very high qualifications that say very, very incoherent and not properly, things that just don't work and just don't make sense. And then you start looking, well, what is their motivation? Why are they saying these things? And it's clearly not because they're telling you, they want you to understand the truth of the situation, so why are they saying it? Or else they're very dim, but that's usually not the situation. It's usually they've got some other reason. But whatever the reason is, you can just forget about those people, and you don't actually need to work out why they say all these things they say, but listen to the ones that are making sense, are explaining it properly, and are highly qualified and reliable sources. They actually know. So you need both of those. You need them to actually know or depend on reliable sources, and they need to actually say things that are actually coherent and make sense, and they clearly are just presenting things the way they are, and they don't say these rather strange things that show that they're trying to do something different from just explain something to you. And that's what you need to look out for in a reliable source. So anyway, I'll put the link in the video description, and I put up a previous video, and I listened to it, and I just wasn't explaining things properly. It meandered off in different ways. So this is my second version. Hopefully it'll be a bit better.